there is an important point regarding the influence of modernity and the sheer scope of the modern experiment and of modernity as an era in general, which is kind of all encompassing of the world as a whole. And even those who reject modernity are still undoubtedly influenced by it. As Eric Hobsbawm in his book The Age of Empire writes on page 7 to 8, that under the name of modernism, the avant-garde of this period took over most of 20th century high cultural output. The avant-garde can be understood as kind of like the counterculture or people who sort of experimented with new cultural ideas essentially. Even today, when some avant-gardes or other schools no longer accept this tradition, they still define themselves in terms of what they reject. For example, post-modernism, it's in the name. They are after modernism, yet they're still defining themselves in relation to modernism. That point by Eric Hobsbawm is a very important one, and one that caused me to think a lot. In that modernity has such a incredible influence over the whole world, over Western civilization, over Islamic civilization, over Indian, Chinese, African, all these various civilizations, indeed for the whole of humanity really, that even those who reject it or those who want to move away from it are still inevitably connected to the modern tradition, such that they define themselves in relation to modernity. And of course, this is for a number of reasons. Eric Hobsbawm mentioned a number of reasons for that. So many of the cultural means. So, for example, obviously in his time, he talks about like things like newspapers and radios and mass media. But in our times, we can understand this to be social media, for example, the television or like broadcasting networks, for example. The scope of modern technology, thus, is so vast over the whole world that all culture is essentially subsumed within it, and all culture is expressed through such technological means. So, for example, like I mentioned, television or social media. And so, any cultural expression, whether it be countercultural or dominant cultural, or whether it be a rejection of modernity or agreement with modernity, has to be expressed through these technological means which fundamentally stem from modernity. You can see this with like fundamentalist groups, for example, which reject modernity in principle, but very much use modernist means to spread their message. And there's a fundamental contradiction, sort of, between the adopting of modernist technology and of modern science, let's say, at least how it's understood within the modern era, by fundamentalists, and their willingness to return to pre-modernity, which didn't necessarily emphasize technological and scientific development and progress. So, without a doubt, modernity is so large in its scope that even those who reject it or want to move away from it have to define themselves in relation to it.